All right, before the election, and he was pretty prescient. He was pretty bang on with what was going to happen and where the country was at. We talked to, I think, one of the icons of New Zealand political history, culture, and indeed business, Sir Robert Jones. And I've been wanting to catch up with Sir Bob after the election to see what he makes of it all and the country's reaction to a result he pretty well predicted. And he joins us from Lower Hutt on the line right now. Sir Bob, welcome. How are you?
Not so bad, thanks, Sean.
All right, you did kind of predict this. I think we agreed what the election outcome was going to be. Were there any surprises in it for you, or was it the change you had picked?
Well, it wasn't a surprise. I think that that ACT, their leader, made a few blunders leading up to it, and I think they would have done a lot better than they did. I think, from memory, what they do, about 9% or something.
Yeah.
And I reckon they could have got 15. But leading up to the election, he said some silly things. And the Greens, of course, they were always going to get up, even though they're a bloody shocking lot, as individuals. They're not a Green Party, of course. They're a left party. But their label alone was always going to see them get up. But no, I picked it 18 months out when the then government was riding high. I said it's going to be a landslide. I'm going to do a book, Sean, a fun book, anecdotal book, and I intend to do it this coming year, I should say, going back to my first election, 1949, which in those days I just turned 10 or about to turn 10. And because we all read the newspapers every day, from the time we learned to read, and which is sort of any 10-year-old now in New Zealand has probably never seen a newspaper.
Yeah, and may never.
Well, no, you're right about that. They're dying everywhere, of course, which is sad for me. I'm a newspaper addict.
Yeah.
It's a generation thing, of course. I mean, if you look at the Dom, or whatever it's now calling itself, the Post, it's getting by with massive advertising for cruises. And the people who go on cruises are retirees. They're a generation who habitually bought newspapers. So, they're the right target market. Mind you, they're giving away their advertising. It's very, very cheap in the Post now.
Yeah.
$2,000 a page. God, you could hardly get a classified for that, in their heyday. I've seen them, I can tell you all the slogans. It was make the pound go further in 1949 because kids read the newspaper every day.
Yeah.
And, of course, that was a hell of a shock to me in a working-class family in Lower Hutt. On Sunday morning, they'd counted the votes overnight, watching my father with tears in his eyes listening to Peter Fraser's concession speech. It's a shock for a young boy to see his father crying.
Yeah.
And I remember every election since. Now, there are patterns to it all. So it was very, very predictable that when Labour, it was so artificial. What happened 3 years ago in the election year, it was a gross abuse of position by the Prime Minister, Jacinda. She was on television every day. The country was terrorised, all having to stay at home. Now, those were mistakes, overcooked and so on. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? Everyone sweeping through the country. Now, I got laid low with coronavirus 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I never got to your party because that day I just got poleaxed by it. I was flat on my back.
Exactly. 2 days later, you'd be dancing. I mean, my Auckland office closed down 2 weeks ago for 3 days.
Yeah.
That was all. Yeah, most people are not affected, not drastically. But, of course, in fairness to the government, we didn't know what we were dealing with. Nevertheless, she was on television every single day. Now, that year, 3 years ago, a book was published in Britain on the value to a politician of television exposure. Well, no one had more than that. No wonder the country lost its head. Look, I'm not a proud New Zealander, and that's not an insult, because I've been travelling since my 20s internationally, and when you do that all the time, Sean, you realise people are basically the same everywhere.
Yep.
In pride, after all, you can't be a proud New Zealander unless you created the bloody country. Pride is for a personal accomplishment. But I have been an ashamed New Zealander, and I was a shamed New Zealander that year with the absolute madness of Jacinda mania. It was like a religious cult. I mean, she was she's a pleasant enough woman and all that sort of thing. Now she can't live here. I mean, I'm privy to a bit more.
Bob, I was talking to someone who was in a flight in from the States just 2 or 3 days ago that Jacinda Ardern was on, she had at least half a dozen security people with her.
She has a reason for it, Sean.
And there was real tension, and this person said it wasn't that, it was the comments from passengers around us about her, and it was visceral and nasty and aggressive.
Look, as I keep saying, I'm well aware of certain things. Now, she's terrified. The shocking, abusive letters, the threats to kill her child and that, and so she can't live here. But look, after she did, and I've also predicted, of course, 18 months out, the exact date that she resigned, and there were reasons for that. That I predicted that, and I predicted it would happen on just before or just after New Year's Eve a year ago, and I got that absolutely right 18 months out. But when you've been watching them for as long as I have, you see the patterns and things, and a lot of this was very predictable. What happened with the Jacinda Mania year when the country lost its head? I mean, Christ almighty, how many letters did the bloody Herald publish claiming she'd saved the nation 3 times? First in Christchurch, which was sheer nonsense, the very week that she said to girls, and I know she meant well, let's all wear scarves on our head, etc., out of sympathy. Well, that's a nice gesture. And she hugged people. Well, you would have if you were Prime Minister, male or female, hugged me and that. And the country lost its head over this. Now, that very week in Iran, a middle-aged woman lawyer who was encouraging girls not to wear the headscarf, etc., was sentenced to 150 lashes and life imprisonment. And you would have thought that somebody close to her would have been able to advise her. But I'm aware, after she resigned, she and her husband booked on a number of, or 2 or 3 occasions, in Auckland restaurants, like upmarket Auckland restaurants, you know, with suit wearers and that sort of thing, and for quiet corner tables, and they'd have to get up and leave. You know, the middle-aged men in suits and things would spot it. And the vitriol and hatred that they would go over, the reaction in Auckland to the extension 6 months.
Bob, you've been around a long time. You're a guy who calls a spade a spade. What's your message to those people? And I still get them in my social media feeds. I am of the opinion that she's left public life largely. She's done her time, and whatever that time was, she hasn't stood for re-election. She's a private citizen. What do you say to the sort of people who are still carrying this sort of hatred and still trolling her?
Usually anonymous. You know that only too well.
Yeah.
They lit sites and this sort of thing. They're cowards. And that was quite uncalled for, disagreeing with somebody, etc., etc. I mean, Jacinda is a well-meaning person. She's a decent human being. She should not be subject to that crap.
So you say pull your head in.
Unfortunately,
pull your heads
she can't her own country. She's not bloody safe here. And your story about the airplane flight, I believe you. What the hell's wrong with people? But it does reflect how bitter and angry people were at the same time. Over the excesses, etc. But her domination of the TV, I was pretty angry about that. That was an abuse of her position in my. She probably didn't see it that way, but it was. Look, I'm pretty neutral. People think I'm a right winger. Well, yes, I am in economic terms, but I'm pretty bloody neutral about some of these things. But that's the worst government we've ever had, and I predicted the landslide for one reason. You were scared to mention the word marry, or you're a bloody racist. What this government did was, I guess ultimately it will be repairable, but it's going to take a long time to repair the damage. You got young girls going around with these ghastly tattoos on their chin, because it's how they used to do it 200 years ago, this sort of thing. Well, they used to eat one another 200 years ago. That's the next step. Why don't they start on that?